Hello and welcome to Keg That's YouTube channel. It's a Wednesday morning, I'm brewing a California Common and I've already got started on some smoked coffee porter that I'd made previously, so the day's going quite well so far. But I want to speak to you today about how to use dried yeast. So dried yeast is really easy to use, it's really convenient, it's really simple. However, it's not just as simple as pitching the yeast, because you're not going to get the most out of it if you do that. But the steps you need to take are actually very easy. So just follow these steps and you'll have some really healthy yeast and it'll make some really good beer. There is this myth which comes from a long time ago but is no longer true, which is that dried yeast is inferior to liquid yeast. Dried yeast is actually really good quality these days. There may not be as choice of dried yeast, but it works just as well and can be a bit easier to use. In fact, many commercial breweries rely on yeasts like US-05 as their house yeast to ferment their beers, which sell thousands or hundreds of thousands of units in supermarkets, in bars, in bottle shops, that sort of thing. If it's good enough for them, it's definitely good enough for us. On the morning that the yeast arrives, put it straight in the fridge. It will store really well for a long time in this way. On the morning that you're brewing, take it out the fridge and put it on the side so it warms up gradually to room temperature. About half an hour before the end of the boil a kettle. You're going to need 10 times the volume of water to the weight of the yeast. So if your yeast packet is 10 grams, you're going to need 100 ml of water. Once the water's boiled, find a container which is big enough to hold that amount of water and sanitize it or sterilize it if you can. You can never go too far with sanitization when it comes to dealing with yeast. So in your sanitized container, pour in the right amount of water, so 100 ml or so depending how much yeast you're using. Cover it with some sanitized foil or cling film and leave it to cool down to just below 40 degrees, so any temperature between 30 to 40 degrees. When it reaches that temperature, sprinkle in the yeast. And again, remember sanitization. Spray the yeast packet, spray the scissors, make sure the scissors are clean, and peel back the foil and sprinkle it in and leave it for about 5 minutes or so. Then, after 5 minutes, with a sanitized spoon or something, gently stir the yeast so that it creates a slurry. Leave it for another 5 minutes or so, and then give it another good stir. And then leave it again for maybe 5 to 10 minutes or so, and then it's ready to pitch. It's best not to leave it too long. If you do this hours in advance, the yeast is going to start losing its viability. The reason to rehydrate the yeast in this way is that it increases the yeast's viability. So dried yeast is in a dormant state. If you sprinkle it straight into the wort, you basically surrounded it by all this sugar and all this food, and it gets a shock when it wakes up and it actually kills a lot of the yeast cells. There are some estimates which say that up to half the yeast cells die, so by just sprinkling it in, you're going to underpitch the yeast by half. So if you do want to just sprinkle it in, it might be best to buy 2 yeast packets. By rehydrating the yeast, you're gently waking it up and getting it ready for the huge feast it's about to have. Then you can pour it into the wort, and then it's going to be really happy, it's going to be really healthy, and it'll give you a healthy fermentation. I know there's been some debate online whether this is still necessary or not. In my experience, I found that if I just sprinkle directly onto the wort, my fermentation is less healthy and it has thrown out more fermentation off flavors, and my fermentation has taken much longer. So I would still recommend doing these rehydration steps. As always, make sure your wort is well aerated. What I like to do is when I transfer from the kettle to my fermenter, I transfer from a height so the wort falls and it splashes, and then I like to give the fermentation vessel a bit of a shake just to get a bit of extra aeration in there. This is a really good point for aeration, and probably the only point where you should be aerating your wort or your beer, and it just means that the fermentation will have less lag time and will result in a healthier fermentation. Thank you for watching this video. If you found it useful, please like, please subscribe, and comment below to let us know how you've got on with your fermentations with dried yeast. If you're looking to get some dried yeast, I've got a link below where you can get some. Even though I say there's less choice than liquid yeast, there's still a really good choice of dried yeasts. Thank you for watching. My brew assistant is protesting and he's refusing to work, so I have to do all of this by myself.